City Council meeting for December 10th, 2018. Roll call, please.
Mr. Jones?
Here.
Mrs. Keller?
Here.
Mr. Browning?
Here.
Mr. Rohr?
Here.
Mr. Hellinger?
Here.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Here.
Mayor Riggle?
Here. Tonight's invocation will be led by Father Watson from St. Mary's Church, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
Good and gracious God, as we gather at this time where winter is making a fast approach, may we become more aware of those who do not have adequate food, clothing, and shelter. May we look upon this season as a time of giving more of our time, talent, and treasure, and imitate your generosity, which can never be outdone. We thank you for the many agencies, such as People in Need, Source Point, and Common Ground, who are able to connect resources with human needs and to help see each other as your brothers and sisters. As we begin this meeting, we seek your inspiration and wisdom so that all matters will lead to a successful resolution and that the common good is promoted. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you much. Thank you very much, Father Watson.
Thank you, Father.
Item 4 is the approval of the motion summary. Elaine, if you'll please read this into the record.
Would you like to do it separate?
Yes, please.
Approval of the motion summary of the regular meeting of council held on November 26, 2018 as recorded and transcribed.
Second.
Approval by Mr. Schaefer, second by Mr. Browning. Roll call, please.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Browning?
Yes.
Mr. Rohr?
Yes.
Mr. Hellinger?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
Mayor Riggle?
Yes, motion carries.
And approval of the motion summary of the budget work session meeting held on December 3rd, 2018 as recorded and transcribed.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Schaefer, second by Mr. Browning. Roll call, please.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Browning?
Yes.
Mr. Rohr?
Abstain.
Mr. Hellinger?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
Mayor Riggle?
Yes, motion carries. Item 5 is the consent agenda. Elaine, if you'll please read this into the record.
Item A, acceptance of the motion summary of the Historic Preservation Commission meeting held on September 26, 2018 as recorded and transcribed. Item B, acceptance of the motion summary of the Shade Tree Commission meeting held on October 23, 2018 as recorded and transcribed. Item C, acceptance of the motion summary of the Planning Commission meeting held on November 7, 2018 as recorded and transcribed. Item D, established January 14, 2019 at 7:20 p.m. as a date and time for a public hearing and third reading of ordinance number 18-119, an ordinance for Fahey Bank Company approving a conditional use permit for Fahey Bank on approximately 0.81 acres on property zone B3, Community Business District, and located at 75 West William Street. Item E, established January 14, 2019 at 7:30 p.m. as a date and time for public hearing and third reading of ordinance number 18-120, an ordinance for Nutter Company LLC approving a conditional use permit for Blue Sky Car Wash on approximately 1.28 acres on property zoned A1 PMU, agricultural district with a planned mixed-use overlay district and located on Lot 2 of the Coughlin Crossing development.
Thank you. What is the wish of council on the consent agenda?
I move for approval.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Keller, second by Mr. Schaefer. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Browning?
Yes.
Mr. Rohr?
Yes.
Mr. Hellinger?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
Mayor Riggle?
Yes, motion carries. Item 6 is time set aside for letters, petitions, or public comments for anything that is not on tonight's agenda. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to come forward at this time? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 7, which is committee reports. Mr. Jones?
I have none, Mayor.
Mrs. Keller?
I have none.
Mr. Browning?
None.
Mr. Rohr?
None, thank you.
Mr. Hellinger?
None.
Mr. Schaefer? I've been lazy. No, just kidding. Let's see. Let's jump on down to item 10. you read item 10 for me?
Resolution number 18-65, a resolution establishing guidelines for establishing new community authorities.
I think we had recommended, staff recommended, the last meeting, there was a working group that was going to meet. We weren't able to, so our recommendation is either table this to a date certain or it can remain on the agenda, but the purpose of this would be to establish some parameters for new community authorities. And you did hear some input at the last meeting regarding this. Ultimately, it's a city council policy decision as to whether you want to establish some guidelines as to when you will consider new community authorities that are initiated by the private sector. And I think Mr. Schulman can elaborate.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is it's not so much parameters as it is guidelines. The difference being it's still council's prerogative, and guidelines are sort of signposts of what people can expect, but you're always able to deviate from those guidelines in special circumstances because it's hard to fit every situation in the one document, no matter how hard we work at it. But otherwise, Tom's right, we could either just keep it on the agenda until that working group revises it, or we can table it until a date certain, or the third option would be to table it, and then when the group meets, we could just move to pick it back up off the table. At that point, we might be in the next year anyway, so we'd probably just reintroduce it as a new 2019 piece of legislation.
Okay.
Or resolution.
This ordinance 1865 until after the comes back with recommendations.
A second on that?
Second.
A motion by Mr. Schaefer, a second by Mr. Jones. Roll call, please.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Browning?
Yes.
Mr. Rohr?
Yes.
Mr. Hellinger?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
Mayor Riggle?
Yes, motion carries. Let's go on to item 11, which is the fifth reading of ordinance number 1890.
Ordinance number 18-90, an ordinance finding that the creation of the Terra Alta Community Authority will be conducive to the public health, safety, convenience, and welfare, is intended to result in the development of a new community, declaring that authority to be organized in a body politic and corporate, defining the boundary of that authority's new community district, providing the method of appointing members to that authority's board of trustees, and fixing the surety for those trustee bonds.
Mr. Schulman?
Madam Mayor, members of council, in your packet, you should have the amended petition submitted by the developer / applicant, which reflects the comments and discussion from the last meeting. True to their word, they did get it to us the very next day. I reviewed it, but more importantly, we had Greg Daniels, who is our kind of expert in this area, review it. And I believe the revisions do indicate what council had indicated they would be acceptable for, except what would be acceptable to them from the last meeting.
Any questions or comments for Darren?
And the only other thing to note is we don't have the appointments for the city yet. The requirement for that is 10 days from the effective date of the legislation. So given there's no emergency clause, we have about 40 days to pick people. So we should start thinking about who we'd want to appoint.
All right, is there a motion on ordinance number 1890?
I'll move the approval of ordinance 1890.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Schaefer, second by Mr. Jones. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Browning?
Yes.
Mr. Rohr?
Yes.
Mr. Hellinger?
No.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
Mayor Riggle?
Yes, motion carries.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So 12, can you get through 12 and 13 in 5
Yeah,
minutes?
yeah. I think you can.
If you read item 12 and item 13.
Ordinance number 18-105, an ordinance approving a preliminary subdivision plat request by Macapa LLC for Bell Commons for 4 single-family lots on approximately 1.344 acres on property zoned R3, one family residential district, and located on the north side of Bell Avenue and on the east side of Liberty Road. An ordinance number 18-106, an ordinance approving a final subdivision plat request by Macapa LLC for Bell Commons for 4 single-family lots on approximately 1.344 acres on property zoned R3, one family residential district, and located on the north side of Bell Avenue and on the east side of Liberty Road.
Mr. Eflin?
Madam Mayor, members of council, this was presented at your last meeting. This is a 4-lot by right subdivision here on Bell Avenue. As we indicated last time, this leaves the balance of the property, hopefully, with the property owner working with us to affect a zone change and a plan that makes sense to them and sense to us in terms of a transitional use. But in front of you tonight is just a 4-lot subdivision that's shown in yellow on the screen. Happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions for Dave? Any motions?
I remember last time we were here, we had asked to have somebody come.
We did reach out to him and he did not respond. We've tried twice.
I'll move for approval of ordinance 18-105.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Schaefer, second by Mrs. Keller. Any further discussion?
I'm a member of the public, and I just wanted to have a couple.
You'll have to come forward to the microphone.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for hearing me and allowing me to speak for just a couple minutes.
I need your name and address as you
Okay,
sit down.
Certainly. My name is Anna Willow, and I live at 56 Lobdell Drive here in Delaware. And the reason that I came here tonight is I recently heard about this, and it just was something that really spoke to my heart. I want to make it really clear from the outset that I have absolutely nothing at all against the developer and his plans. If anything, I'm a bit worried for his investment. So I just wanted to take a couple minutes to share my perspective and my story, and I know our time is short and I'll be as brief as possible. I really, truly hope that we can all work together to improve the air quality in our city, both for the enjoyment of this great town and for our collective health. In terms of my story, I moved here from out of town approximately 3 years ago. I didn't understand the lay of the land. Our developer and builder, didn't tell us anything about the lay of the land and how close we actually were to very polluting industries. So what happened for us is that right away when we moved in, we started noticing very strong but occasional odors. So I investigated to find out where the smell was coming from. I found out it was coming from Liberty Castings. Depending on the wind direction, sometimes where we live in Curtis Farms, the odor and the fumes are so strong that it gives us headaches and makes our eyes water. Not always, it depends on the wind direction. But we're actually much, much further away from the source of the emissions than the proposed development. We're also northwest of Liberty Castings compared to east, which is directly downwind and very, very close. I sent a letter on file, I believe you have, that goes into more detail about some of my feelings and my perspectives, but I just wanted to make it clear, and just share my heart in person. That I just don't feel like any family should have to go through this kind of thing. It's the excitement of building your own home for the first time, and moving into a great community, and then having that followed very, very rapidly by disappointment and feelings that you really messed up and made a poor choice. I worry continuously about the long-term health of my 2 children who are here at Delaware City Schools and enjoying the schools a ton and doing great here. And I just don't want to see families have to go through this same kind of tension and deciding, should we stay here in a community that we've come to love, but worry about health and things like that. And it's very hard. When I thought about this, I feel very strongly that it just breaks my heart to think about families going through the same thing. And, like I said, I just hope that we can find ways to work together to ensure that Delaware has clean, safe air for all of us. I would love to see the developer be able to turn his plans into reality, but I would also love to see that with a place that has clean, safe air. And that's something that, is far beyond this issue, but it's an issue that sort of brings it to the forefront. So I just took this opportunity to share my perspective.
Okay.
So thank you so much for hearing me out.
Thank
Madam
you.
Mayor, may I make a suggestion? I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Yeah, my name is Anna.
Anna? So I had some of the same concerns many years back about Liberty Castings, and if you called them, I'm pretty sure that you could sit down with them. They gave me a tour.
Okay.
They spoke with me about exactly what is in the emissions and really put a lot of my concerns and fears at ease.
That would be interesting. I have tried calling them, but the number that's published did not go through. So I don't know if there's, it rang and then no one ever picked up, and I haven't had any luck getting in touch with them. So maybe there's an inside number that we could get in touch with.
Yeah, we can help you out.
We can
Yes.
follow up.
And I honestly would say, again, I think there's probably a lot of citizens of Delaware that would love to establish a positive working relationship with Liberty Castings rather than having it set up as this kind of like, oh, they're polluting stuff and we're angry and we're, we don't, I don't think it's productive to be like that. Rather, we'd love to be able to find ways to work together to understand what's going on and to be good neighbors to each other. So I think that, that's a really good direction going forward.
Perfect. Tom, could perhaps?
Yeah, if you can give us your contact information with the clerk that we can
Okay,
follow up with you.
I signed in on the sheet. I can stop.
Just an email or phone number.
Okay.
Maybe Sean could help
Yes.
facilitate
Yep.
something. Okay,
Yep.
perfect. Thank you.
I can look and see if it's on the form, we'll be okay. Thank you.
Okay.
I'd like to make
Yes.
I don't know if anybody else is here to speak on that. But I think one of the things, and what I hear repeatedly from people is they get, and I understand, just like Amy here, she's voicing a concern, but on these land use cases, I think it's really important for members of the public to understand that we are constrained by law to do things. I mean, these are zoned appropriately. They want to use that as within the zoning code, and there's nothing the city can really do to prohibit that unless we want to get sued. And I think that so often the public just does not understand that we can only do what we're legally allowed to do. So just throw that out there.
Thanks, George. Okay, so I had a motion by Mrs. Keller, second by Mr. Schaefer, is that right?
Vice versa, I think.
Oh, was it?
Motion by Vice Mayor Schaefer and a
Okay.
second by Mrs. Kelly.
There you go. Roll call.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Browning?
Yes.
Mr. Rohr?
Yes.
Mr. Hellinger?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
Mayor Riggle?
Yes.
Move for the approval of ordinance 18-106.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Schaefer, second by Mrs. Keller. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Browning?
Yes.
Mr. Rohr?
Yes.
Mr. Hellinger?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
Mayor Riggle?
Yes, motion carries. Let's jump back up to item 8, which is public hearing, 7:15, we're a couple minutes late for ordinance number 18-114.
Ordinance number 18-114, an ordinance amending the schedule of fees and service charges.
This is this.
The ordinance before you is a annual action that we recommend council take that incorporates, if there are any changes to various fees that the city imposes for a number of different reasons, they come to you as part of the budget process. And Attorney Shulman has been working, I believe, with the engineering department and finance regarding those, and I believe there might be some comment about that if you want to
Yeah.
elaborate.
Absolutely. I went over the primary changes last time. I don't recall if the changes came right before the meeting or after the meeting, but there were some additional small adjustments that were added from your very first draft for reservations of room, shelters for the Public Parks Department that came in late. That should be the only difference from the draft that you saw from the very beginning. Otherwise, one of the changes was the engineering proposed way of doing it, and the other was the small cell legislation that we talked about in terms of how to account for that, because right now it's not in a fee, but we're trying to account for both the federal scheme done through comment and the state legislation that happened. We're trying to strike a balance between both of them. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
No, just, I know that we had mentioned at the last meeting that we had gotten feedback from the BIA regarding the way we were imposing our charge for engineering and for inspection. And so for the last several months, Bill has been working with his staff to do a better job of trying to track what our costs are and the amount of time that we're spending on those, and have come up with a different approach actually to those charges. And Bill, do you want to you can just provide an overview to council?
Yeah, I think we kind of provided an update before, but again, I'll just be real brief that from the future new projects, what we'll do is just track the actual inspection costs through our contractors or our staff inspection time, and be billing that on a monthly basis, plus a 10% administrative fee that covers all other employees' involvement during the inspection time as well. Those figures are really bolstered by, as Tom mentioned, the work over the past year where we looked fairly closely at the actual costs and overhead costs for inspection. Benefits to good quality development that has good cost control, good control over their contractors, is they'll realize lower costs because inspection will be smoother. A project that has problems for whatever reason, it could be the site, it could be the plans, are going to have higher inspection fees because it's going to take longer to do it. So really, what you end up with is everyone really paying their proportionate share of inspection based on the quality of their own product, which I think is what was stressed by the development community through the BIA, and it doesn't really change fundamentally. We're still covering our costs. We're just making sure that those who have the most efficient projects will pay less, and those who are more burdensome to the community will pay more. I think it's still in line with when we initially made some major adjustments to development fees back in around 2000, where the council at the time wanted development to pay for development, and one of the underscoring principles there was the community shouldn't have to burden the cost of inspection, development should. That premise hasn't changed. It's not just the appropriate development is going to pay their fair share, whatever that share may be. We had a good discussion with BIA last week over the phone again. I think they're generally very supportive of the changes. We're working on coming up with what projects are so early in the stage, what we throw into the new fee structure versus the ones that are far along. We'll just finish up under the existing fee structure that's already in place. And we've pretty well made that list. I think there's 3 projects that come to mind that are just starting that can also be applicable to the new fee structure as well. And again, I think the BIA thought that was a fair way to make the transition. The last part of that is working out just some of the fine details with finance regarding how to gather the bills from our contractors and how to report our own hours, send that to finance in an appropriate way so we can actually package that into an invoice, monthly invoice. If there's ever an issue with any development, small or large, where invoices aren't being paid, then we have the ability at that point then just to say, well, we're not going to inspect, so you can't continue on. I don't really predict an issue with knowing the development community, especially the large development community, very cooperative, and I don't really see we'll have a problem there. Small projects, we, between help with Sean and Dave and his staff and our staff, we work very closely with these, so I think it'll be a very smooth transition ultimately, and it really hopefully hits the mark of what the BIA and development community was looking for.
I just have a question. Last time we talked about this, we talked about whether or not we were going to charge take a deposit up front, 20 or 25% deposit. And
Right.
I agree with you. Most of the major developers, that's not going to be an issue, but I can see maybe the smaller ones, the less experienced or less financially stable ones where it might be. Have we decided whether we're going to do that or how that might work?
Right now, we don't have a deposit, and again, the underlying thought was within the first month, we're going to have a bill. So there's going to be a problem surfacing within 30 days to 45 days with any project. Most projects take at minimum 4 to 6 months, even a small project, to complete. So if there are any indications of issues, we can right up front address them, sit back down with the developer and representatives and get it resolved right away. So I don't think having to take a deposit and then track that deposit, then less, and start taking some money out, then go negative and start invoicing, it just creates a little bit more cumbersome than just we have enough staff to work just hand in hand with each developer and just understanding that they will pay. And if something happens with one, then we'll report back that we have an issue. But again, we have so many staff available to help developers be successful. That's always our goal. They're our clients, these new developments, investing in the community. So we do everything we can to try to make them successful. So we really don't feel that putting the deposit up front is really necessary.
And I think if it became a problem, we'd come back to council, I think, and make that recommendation.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, this is a public hearing. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to come forward at this time? If you'll please state your name and address for the record.
Good afternoon or evening, I guess. John Melkai, representing the Building Industry Association of Central Ohio, 445 Hutchinson Avenue. It occurred to me on my way up here tonight that this is my first time speaking to council, and I'm pleased to do so in support of this ordinance. This has been outlined very well by your staff, but Construction inspection is a vital city service to the development process. Private and public interests are aligned as everyone wants a timely construction process and to be assured that the construction is done properly. It is our position that the ordinance is an improvement to ensure that costs of inspections are paid in a manner that provides full funding to the city so that the city is appropriately staffed to provide good and timely services. We appreciate our opportunity over the past year to work with the city administration to bring this ordinance to council, and thank you very much for doing so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to come forward at this time? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. What is the wish of council? Wait, it's only second reading. Yeah, take it to a third.
Yeah.
Okay,
There's no rush because it wouldn't take effect until
Right.
next year anyway.
I'm sorry. Okay, item 9. If you read this slowly, we can do a 7:30 public hearing.
Ordinance number 18-109, an ordinance making appropriations for the year 2019 and declaring an emergency. Emergency clause, that this ordinance is hereby declared to be an emergency measure necessary to provide for the public peace, safety, health, and welfare of the city, and further to provide lawful appropriations available for expenditure by January 1st, 2019, and as such will be in full force and effect immediately upon its passage.
Thank you. Mr. Homer?
So this is the second reading, the second public hearing, which will start in a couple of minutes. The planned schedule is to adopt the 2019 budget on Thursday, next Thursday, the 20th. And I know there was some follow-up discussion from the last council meeting that we had, and we're prepared to talk about that this evening. I don't know if you want to do that now or towards the end of the meeting, but we're prepared to do. I know you have a lot of other items on here. If you want to act on those, we can come back to this.
No, let's do it now.
Okay. Well, I know there were some questions that were raised. Councilwoman Keller had raised some questions regarding the city's fund balance, and we provided some background information about that. We're prepared to talk about that this evening, and anything else related to the budget.
Well, thank you. I very much appreciate all of the hard work that went into preparing the budget, all of the city staff members that worked hard on this. We have an excellent finance director. We have a superb city manager, so this is in no way a criticism to any of that work. But I feel personally uncomfortable approving a budget that shows expenditures that exceed our revenues. And our revenues are projected to increase by what specific percentage again? Can you remind me?
5.2 overall revenues, 7%.
7%.
Yeah, over the budget.
So that's a pretty healthy increase. And I'm pretty sure that between all of us really smart people, we could reflect expenditures that don't exceed what we expect to bring in. And I'm not sure if anyone else shares that concern, but I wanted to just raise it because we are talking about adding quite a few staff positions. And if everything in the budget happens exactly the way we're planning, we will need to tap into that fund balance to cover staff positions that we're adding. That raises just a concern in my mind about how prudent that is.
Well, when Dean's had sent out the past 20-some years to show how it all comes out, it just somehow, that man always makes it work. I don't know how. I'm not that uncomfortable with it at this point. I don't know how the rest of you feel. But
I agree, $200,000 out of 44 million. Not 40, given the history of how our budget is performed in the past.
I think the other piece to bear in mind also is there's some of those, I don't know what the word is the Dean used, about use contingency monies here towards the end of the year that may or may not get used, which then totally on the scope of $900,000, and you're looking at $200,000. So there's, it's potential that we could have that money coming in. being 1% of our general fund money's budget, I just, personally, I'm not concerned. Because due to our history. You know, our historical performance has been such that, and we don't see anything significant on the horizon that would impede our ability to continue to perform as we have in the past.
Agreed, but if there was some sort of significant downturn, we have our fund balance at almost the bare minimum that we can take it. 17.6?
But we have that incumbent of 950 in there.
Right.
Right.
We also set up a few years ago the Budget Stabilization Fund, which was intended to address issues that might come up, losing an employer, something that is a one-off kind of a situation. And so that stabilization, that budget reserve, which you set up in 2014, that was included in that memo. I don't know, most of you may recall that we set up an economic development reserve fund, we set up the budget stabilization, and that's actually when I believe we adjusted our reserve balance policy to go up to 17%. We had recommended at that time, I think Dean had indicated between 10 and we ended up with 17%. But perhaps Dean can elaborate because I want to make sure that we're just capturing the right information here.
This balanced budget issues come up several times in the almost 30 years I've been on city council, and we spend a lot of time debating what a balanced budget is. The last go around was for the 2014 budget and prepared some information back then. We looked at what's a balanced budget, what does the GFOA recommend, what do any number of different entities recommend for reserve balances. We've had the taste great less filling debate about, is it a fund balance, is it a rainy day fund, when does it rain, and all those sort of things. And I decided back in 2014, subsequent to that, to pull it together, and we made some amendments and some changes to our management policies. Many times over the years, I've told city councils I'm probably the one most at risk if we get into one of those situations and we can't pay our bills. I've never been concerned from that standpoint. I would be comfortable with a 5 or 7% fund balance reserve, but it's not just me. I think council needs to be comfortable and whatnot. But we established not just what's the percentage that it should be, is it 2 months of expenditures, but we put in place a policy that said we will have a targeted year-end fund balance of 17% in our general fund. On top of that, we maintain a set-aside reserve fund of 5% in a separate fund, which is $1.2 million sitting there. Explained at the time, how might that be utilized? When does it rain? What might be a purpose where that may come about? And I can spend more time talking about that too. I think I mentioned at the last council meeting, if we were to have major issues, if we were to have, I don't know, PPG and Kroger and some other employer shut their doors and walk away, conservatively, we have 2 or 3 years at least to react to that. And if those issues occur, yeah, we'll probably have to reduce services. But we've got plenty of time to do that, and that's what we put in place in our management policies. Nobody can predict the future. And so we've got more than adequate reserves, which buy us plenty of time to make the hard decisions that potentially would need to be made. If it's a temporary downturn, there's plenty of reserve capability to weather those. I don't see any on the horizon. I think 2018 was probably as good a budget year as we've had. But again, we can revisit that notion of what a balanced budget is and what's an adequate reserve. I don't know if that's elaborating too much or not enough, but the policy issues about adding new city employees, those, I mean, we could we could be comfortable and counsel from a standpoint of saying, hey, we need less government. We need to reduce government and rebate money back. That's a policy thing, and you can have that opinion. That's not what this is about. At least from my communication, saying where we're at from that financial standpoint and how susceptible we are. One of the other things that was part of the documents, I know is a lot there, we shared it a few years ago, is one of the things when they look at a community is how if we had an employer in town that represented 15-20% of our employment base, auto, one of those sort of things, yeah, but we really don't. We're fairly diverse. And most, if I looked historically, very predictive. Doesn't mean something couldn't happen, but like I mentioned, even in the event that does, we've got more than ample time to, change our service levels. So.
I'm not saying, thank you for that. I'm not saying that we're in any kind of dire straits in terms of not being able to pay the bills. Mine is just a purely philosophical position that when we begin the budgeting process, we say, how many beans do we have to work with? And the current budget is showing more beans than we have. Tapping into our spare beans to just simplify it as, simple as possible. We don't have the funding to support the current budget that's in front of us without tapping into our fund balance to make that work. If everything happens exactly the way it's written on paper. Now, we all know that won't. My position, though, is we should start with a solid plan that doesn't spend more than we anticipate to earn. Even if it's a little bit, even if it's a small percentage. And especially when we're adding staff positions. But I'm okay to be in the minority on that. It's just a philosophical opinion that we shouldn't spend more than we anticipate to bring in.
Darren's going to jump back and tell.
I don't have to, but I
No, they can.
Councilman Keller, it sounds like you had two issues, one being the money side, one of it being the adding personnel side, and when you don't know. One thing, as one of the people who asked for a position, and while I still think it would be very helpful, we can delay that hiring a little bit to allow us to check some of those indicators and, excuse me, address some of those concerns. If we wait a couple months, we would know if things are trending possibly down, and that might reduce some of that risk. At least from my position, I'd be willing to do that if it helped ameliorate that concern. I mean, you're not going to save a ton of money at a part-time, but we can at least see how some of the receipts are coming in, a couple of financial reports before we fill that, if that would help address that.
I'm open to all sorts of, if other people agree with me, I think that there are all sorts of other things that could be done also, not necessarily delaying things, but just looking at those numbers and saying, are these the most accurate guesstimates of what we're actually going to spend? But if I'm the only one that has an issue with it, then that's kind of a waste of time probably.
Well, January 1st, I don't think these positions are lined up ready to go. So right off the bat, the money that's in there is based on a full year, I believe. And nobody's starting January 1st because I don't think anybody's in the queue waiting to be hired. So you've got savings right there, right now. And see how the city works, it takes us quite a while to hire anybody. No offense, but that's just the way it works.
And that makes sense too. So could those numbers be adjusted?
If the issue's just on paper, again, I've had this discussion many times, even in the information I had given you, there's a legal balanced budget. This budget's balanced. So that's clearly been established. That's the way it is. You get that carryover fund balance. As I mentioned at the other meeting, you got to really understand a little bit more about accounting for things and accruals and different things like that. Bill was talking about the developers paying. Our previous process was they prepaid their inspection fees. Well, right now we have about $500,000 of prepaid inspection fees, money that we've taken in 2018 that we won't pay out until 2019. If I put that in the budget, as opposed to putting it down there as at the bottom, then we'd be $500,000 more out of balance. And that's not the case. That money came in, and those are the things I track on an ongoing basis, is our cash flow and our ability. The budget is in balance from anybody's definition, but obviously you're looking just revenues and expenditures, and Was it mentioned there? I lost my train of thought. Oh, one of the things that I sent out, I said there's a legal definition of a balanced budget, and there's a structural balanced budget. At times over the years, council had concerns about this carryover fund balance and whether that gets added in as revenue. Again, it's not just some of the entities I shared with you. We legally have to submit a budget to the County Budget Commission, and that's what they have to go in and they have to review. They have to certify back to us that our revenues, our expenditures do not exceed our available resources. And they don't by several millions of dollars because of that carryover balance. But that's all well and good. So what happens if this cash flow issue, we have major revenues that come in a given year and our expenditures aren't necessarily falling in line with that? There's a structural balance that I monitor and look at things, look at staffing levels. I updated an analysis I do annually as part of my finance director's report, but it comes out the first part of the year, where I look at our total revenues and our total staffing levels, payroll and benefits as a percentage of revenues. That number hasn't fundamentally changed to any great extent over the last 10 or 15 years. It's like 57%. And that's what the 2019 budget reflects. I look at our debt service cost and say, what could happen? What happens if revenues come down? Do we have debt service costs? We have a fair amount of outstanding debt, but all of it's tied to utilities, NCAs, and all things. Very little of it's connected back to our general fund. So the various cash flows, as far as when the monies come in and go out, is not necessarily a problem. And then structurally, even though legally we have a balanced budget, structurally we have a pretty good balanced budget from that standpoint. Have no reservations about us overspending or overcommitting. So that's the economic reality of it. If I were to look at, again, over past history, any year where I was a little bit concerned about moving forward, whether we're going to have a pinch, this wouldn't even be close, because we're pretty conservative place right now. I get the revenues are a little bit less than the expenditures, but over the years we used to have that situation, or we didn't have that situation. We had to balance the budget, at least on paper, and we'd end up with a lot of needs being cut out of the budget, and then we'd end up at the end of the year, because the realities of what actually comes to play, coming way under budget, and we weren't able to address issues out there, and the fund balance would change and whatever else. There was a period of time where someone on council said, well, okay, but then we can decide what to do with the budget surpluses then that end up at the end of the year. And that's an approach too. I'm not at all concerned about whether our budget is going to be balanced. It is from a legal standpoint. I know it will be even more so at the end of the year, but I get it too from the standpoint of some people just want to look at it from revenues and expenditure standpoint. So.
I feel like I'm kind of out on a limb here.
I listened to you when you called, but then once I got Dean and looked at all that information, I'm fine with it.
Sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. My problem is if a constituent were to say to me, Mrs. Keller, how can you show on paper that you're going to spend more than you're going to earn? I can't justify that. And it's using fund balance. That to me, we can call it a legally balanced budget, but it's technically not.
No, you're looking at the numbers in the wrong way. Just because I show revenues and expenditures, again, things don't happen in a nice, neat 12-month period of time. You look at things and some things still, that's why, again, if you really wanted to get at it, you could look at our accrual-based financial statements where they take that into account. They'll show encumbrances, they'll show prepaids amount, and they'll reflect that. In that standpoint, it's again, we're not in a balanced budget. Trying to keep things consistent and such that we can at least follow a cash basis budget, we're showing projected revenues and expenditures. Again, our expenditures don't always match up with when the revenue came in. In 2017, let's see here once. 2017, we took in $1.8 million in engineering fees. Under your version of this, we could have spent $1.8 million and still been in balance. No, because I know those costs are going to come up in future years. That's why last year I set aside $800,000, knowing that we were going to incur cost in future years. And this year it's at $500,000. So, to say that we're adopting a budget that's not in balance isn't accurate. And like I said, in 2018, with what we adopted and where we're at. Anyways.
I'm not sure what I'm missing.
I'm not either. And I don't know how to help you.
I don't feel like I need help. I feel like I completely understand what's on the paper. It's not a long story.
Well, what the issue is, what's on the paper, again, going back to a cash number, that is a projected snapshot in time.
Mm-hmm.
But neither the revenues nor the expenditures are guaranteed to flow within that 12-month period.
Right.
Just like the $900,000 that we have potentially, that could all come in as additional, you could show it as additional revenue for this coming year.
It would go back to the fund balance. It wouldn't go as revenue.
Well, it would be available monies. Let me put it that way. Yeah, if it doesn't get spent. Yeah.
But it would go to the fund balance.
No, because, and
Yes.
again, the fund balance though is and remember when we had the 23 or 24% fund balance back in 2014 or whenever that was, that, we said, this is crazy. Right. This is not fiscally responsible to be holding these much money. So that's when we came up with the various numbers, the 17% figure and the rainy day monies. And then we spent down to get to those monies. That's the same thing here. If we're already above 17%, you don't put $900,000 more on top of that.
If 900,000 more went on top of it, though, it would go to fund balance. It still wouldn't go to revenue for this year. So it wouldn't help the idea of being out of balance.
Yeah, you're
Yeah. We've got $910,000 set aside as encumbrances, money that we're committed to. We're likely going to spend some for supplies, some for engineering fees. Let's say we only spend half of that. We've got $400,000 or $500,000 that we didn't spend. Now our budget is $300,000.
Yeah.
Over.
It's going to go to the fund balance, though. It won't be shown as a revenue.
The fund balance is simply how much money we have versus how much we spend. We're going to have $500,000 more if we don't spend all that encumbered money.
Right.
So now we're $300,000 ahead of the game.
I understand that.
Percent plus the rainy day fund.
But if you just take a look at what we anticipate to bring in this year with what we have planned to spend, we're not in balance. And when I first came to council in 2008, this was like one of our biggest issues when we did the budget, was making sure we were in balance. And now all of a sudden, several years have gone by, and now it's okay that we show budgets like this. In 2010, 2011, this would never have been.
Well, that was also a period when our finances were a lot more constrained. Post 2008, you'll recall we had that budget indicator gauge where we actually monitored. We were looking at layoffs. We were looking at major reductions in service because it was post 2008. So that was a different set of financial circumstances that we found ourselves in, and having to do that. But if you go back, if you just take a look at the historical information going all the way back 28 years ago to 1990, there were a number of years when the city, not unlike today, where you were recognizing the fund balance as a revenue and using that as part of the budget process. And I think part of it is your concern about that and saying if you But for that, we wouldn't be in balance, but that's just looking at it in that narrow, in that narrow way, which is okay. It's just not.
My fear is that if we get comfortable spending rainy day fund when it's not raining, then we're going to get more and more and more comfortable as the time goes on.
We're not talking about streamlines. Yeah. Different fund money.
First of all, you do have a budget stabilization fund that we've set aside, which is 5% of our operating expenditures. So that's set up in the budget. Now there's an appropriations, that money is there. Plus you have the fund bat, the 17.9%, which we're estimating we're going to start off the year with. So.
Okay, that's,
I mean,
we're still,
I know.
we're still using. Okay.
If the numbers on the sheet were $1 million or $1.5 million, then I think it's something to be concerned about. We're talking $200,000 on a $24 million budget, not taking into account that we've got the 70% surplus plus the rainy day fund, and that historically we're always going to do better than we predict we're going to do. I don't think that little bit of money is that big a deal.
Okay. I do. That's okay.
That's okay, you can't.
Okay, I'm happy to concede.
Okay. Any other questions for Tom or Dean at this time? Okay, we'll open it up to the public. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to come forward on this subject?
Any other questions for?
What? Is that an echo?
That's weird. Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. And this will, would you jump up for?
No, because I think we just want to point out a couple of, Dean, did you have anything regarding the end of the budget for the adoption, before we adopt?
Just process-wise, and again, we have one more meeting before the end of the year. And I don't know if there'll be any council proposed or recommended changes, but typically I'll summarize those if there are, along with potential administrative changes. I do have 3 of them, and I can hand them out. There's nothing really that you haven't already seen to a certain extent. The first one is we did do a supplemental earlier in August of this year for the parking lot issue over there by the building that we just went through, and do the renovations to City Hall. Those 2 projects, or whatever we want to call them, won't get under contract before the end of the year. So appropriations don't carry over from one year to the next just because it was there. So we have to reappropriate that. So that'll be one of the changes, amendments to the budget, is to reappropriate those 2 projects. The other is a small one. Our YMCA payment was put in here. I put a rough number of $200,000. It's actually going to be $203,772. And that is a specific appropriation. So I know that we would otherwise have to supplement that next year. So it bumps it up by $3,772. Then the other potential change is, I think council's got some legislation related to the clerk's compensation. That would increase the wage and benefit amount in the city council budget. So interacted with the departments. I think we're pretty good with a lot of other projects for 2018 as far as either already have been reappropriated, but those are the only changes we would otherwise have other than any that city council may recommend. I can summarize that if there are some. If we can identify those, I can indicate what the impact may be, and put that in a memo form, such that before the next council meeting, you'll know there will be a few amendments to the budget ordinance and what they are. The other thing isn't so much budget related as it is year-end supplemental. And as I've mentioned earlier, there will be a year-end supplemental that'll have probably a lot of wage and benefit amounts in it, because we're doing that 27th pay period in 2018. So you'll see a number of different accounts that are just related to that 27th pay period. There's a couple other small ones I've kind of gone through at this point where, until we get to closer to the end of the year, I don't think there's anything of any substance that would need to be included in that year-end supplemental. But I'll try to get something to you. They're still issuing purchase orders at a department level through this Friday. So until we get those in, I get a chance to take a look at that. I'll try to get you something early, maybe Tuesday or Wednesday. I want it to be as accurate as I can. And again, we got to kind of project through the remainder of the year. But I'll try to get, it may not be a week before that meeting on the 21st or 20th. But I'll have a year-end supplemental that'll show some of the changes, and I'll give an explanation of why for council.
Thank you. So this will go to another reading then on December the 20th.
Third and final.
Yes.
Just out of curiosity's sake, I'm wondering how far we're comfortable going. I won't use the term out of balance, but 250,000 is not a big deal. Like, but what number do you guys think it becomes a big deal? Just something to think about.
Yeah, and I would also say that starting the process earlier with council is an option. I mean, it would require probably some more meetings.
No.
But getting what you're looking at right now is really staff's kind of recommendation in terms of level of service, and that discussion really is ultimately a policy issue for city council and the public, and that's what we could start this process earlier in the year, and I'd have a better idea of what council was thinking in terms of service levels and our operations. That could help inform us, but that's just a kind of a sidebar comment that the mayor is looking at me and saying.
Well, I mean, you struggle now to get us the budget on time, and then we jump right into it. I don't know how many more meetings we can do.
No, it would require more time.
I mean, if you're talking about the staff, is that what you're thinking? So we know ahead of time when they want to add more staff?
Well, I'm saying that that earlier in the year, if council sets its priorities such that these are the programmatic areas we want to be worked on, and we want more attention over here. This area is pretty good the way it is, whether that's in our recreation services, whether that's in our planning and development services, whether that's in our public safety services. That can be helpful, I think, in terms of me trying to make a recommendation to
Well, I think
you.
what's forefront in all of our minds is our roads, but I can't figure out how to fix that. I mean, I think there's not a person on this council that doesn't want to see the connectivity and the maintenance fixed on the roads, but we don't have an answer for that.
Well, we do have an answer.
Well, we do.
We just don't want to pull the trigger on it.
Well,
So,
I mean, if we could
And
find a
put-
bucket of money, we would definitely put it into our roads to make it better for everyone. So maybe with each director speaking once a month, maybe something will come out of that. I don't know, since we're trying that differently. Go ahead, Dean. Sorry.
Just two things real quick. What Tom's talking about, again, a couple years ago, we got the GFOA certificate for budget presentation, an award, but it's not so much the document, it's the process. And any best practices process you talk about out there, when you talk about how to allocate limited resources, where are your priorities? They all talk about, if we're on a calendar year and we do our budgets at this point in the year, sometimes April, May, June, whenever, there's a policy type of discussion at a council level to just say, we get that information, you submit about service levels. We have our own personal thoughts about whether our service for this or this is good, bad, indifferent. And it does help to provide that, even if it's in general terms, to administrative staff in advance of them sitting down and cranking out what they see as the priorities. It could be just that we see a high priority to try to do as much as we can to maintain roads. And that's the general direction to city staff. And we want to see how you were able to incorporate a higher level of service for road maintenance in your next budget that you present, whatever it could be. That's generally the way they communicate that. The other issue, a little bit with what Lisa had said about what is an amount. I know each council member could have their viewpoint on what amount we would be quote unquote out of balance. To me, it's more a matter of looking at where we're at the end of the year and that target. And that's why we changed to that 17% ending fund balance. And, that's the way any other business would manage too. We're looking at that concept, whether revenues are $500,000 higher than expenditures in any given year or vice versa. Back in 2014, we actually in a budget year spent $1.7 million more than we took in. Again, the key becomes that target year-end balance that we have that provides us with that wherewithal to weather any storms and give us enough time to react. 3, 4, 5, whatever, before we would have to get into cutting services because things had occurred. So, and that's why, again, I look at it differently, and I understand from a council perspective, just looking at revenues and expenditures. But anyways, that's it.
Okay. Let's move on to item 14. No, nobody came forward. I said I closed the public. Item 14 is the second reading of ordinance number 18-110.
Ordinance number 18-110, an ordinance amending the Delaware Municipal Court and Clerk of Court employee benefits and leave policies and declaring an emergency. Emergency clause. This ordinance is declared to be an emergency measure necessary for the immediate preservation of the public peace, property, health, safety, and welfare of the city. The emergency clause is required to enact the changes effective on December 26, 2018. Therefore, this ordinance shall be in full force and effect immediately upon its passage.
Yeah, these next sets of readings are really the management pay plan, for the various city employees. So, second reading, third reading when adoption is scheduled for the 20th. So,
but I'm happy to answer any questions the council may have. I have limited information about the clerk, but I certainly can answer any questions you may have about the management pay plan or the part-time seasonal pay plan. Okay. You know how to get in touch with me.
Yes, we do. So I want to read 15, 16, 17. Go.
Ordinance number 18-111, an ordinance amending ordinance number 17-78, establishing the pay and benefits for various part-time and intermittent and seasonal employees of the city of Delaware and declaring an emergency. Emergency clause. This ordinance is declared to be an emergency measure necessary for the immediate preservation of the public peace, property, health, safety, and welfare of the city. The emergency clause is required to enact the changes effective on December 26, 2018. Therefore, this ordinance shall be in full force and effect immediately upon its passage. Ordinance number 18-112, an ordinance amending the management, professional, technical, confidential, and supervisory employees pay plan and declaring an emergency. Emergency clause. This ordinance is declared to be an emergency measure necessary for the immediate preservation of the public peace, property, health, safety, and welfare of the city. The emergency clause is required to enact the changes effective on December 26, 2018, which coincides with the new calendar year. Therefore, this ordinance shall be in full force and effect immediately upon its passage. In ordinance number 18-113, an ordinance establishing new salary rates for the mayor and members of city council effective January 1st, 2020, and repealing ordinance number 13-44.
Thank you. Those all come back for another reading on the 20th. If you'll read 18 and 19.
Ordinance number 18-115, an ordinance approving a final development plan request by Pulte Homes for Heatherton Phase 8 consisting of 42 single-family lots on approximately 12.8 acres zoned R3 PRD, one family residential with a planned residential district, and located on Boulder Drive, Elbridge Street, Gwinnett Street, and Clymer Street. And ordinance number 18-116, an ordinance approving a final subdivision plat request by Pulte Homes for Heatherton Phase 8 consisting of 42 single-family lots on approximately 12.8 acres zoned R3 PRD, one family residential with a planned residential district, and located on Boulder Drive, Elbridge Street, Gwinnett Street, and Clymer Street.
Mr. Eckel?
Madam Mayor, members of council, this is for Section 8 of Heatherton. This is the final phase of this subdivision, which began in approximately 2001. It is located just to the west of Houck Road and is the southernmost section in the subdivision. It is zoned R3 with PRD overlay. Aerial photograph should we need it, but pretty much tabletop farmland. And an overall from the preliminary development plan, when we changed from Laner Woods, some of you will recall this was entirely Laner Woods, and we changed to Heatherton for really the balance of the single-family subdivision. This was really only a few years ago. You can see here colored in blue is Section 8, which is comprised of 42 single-family lots, which all are in conformance with the preliminary plan and the preliminary plat. Your planning commission does recommend unanimous approval, as do its staff. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions?
Phase 8.
I know, it's amazing. Well, they're sold out. I mean, it's crazy. So this is the first reading. Do you want to take it to a second one?
I will mention that the applicant's engineer was going to be here tonight. They've had some turnover in Pulte, and so they were actually double booked this evening, and I indicated I would let you know that that was okay and that they couldn't be here this evening. So just to let you know. I think there are some anxious people to get ready to start on the section, even though it's cold outside.
Mm-hmm.
I move to suspend the rules requiring 3 readings on ordinance 18-116.
How about 115?
115.
Thank you.
Second.
I have a motion, Mrs. Keller, second by Mr. Browning. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Browning?
Yes.
Mr. Rohr?
Yes.
Mr. Hellinger?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
Mayor Riggle?
Yes.
Move for approval on ordinance 18-115.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Keller, second by Mr. Browning. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Browning?
Yes.
Mr. Rohr?
Yes.
Mr. Hellinger?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
Mayor Riggle?
Yes, motion carries.
Move to suspend the rules requiring 3 readings on ordinance 18-116.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Keller, second by Mr. Browning. Roll call, please.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Browning?
Yes.
Mr. Rohr?
Yes.
Mr. Hellinger?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
Mayor Riggle?
Yes.
Move for approval of 18-116.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Keller, second by Mr. Browning. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Browning?
Yes.
Mr. Rohr?
Yes.
Mr. Hellinger?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
Mayor Riggle?
Yes, motion carries. Item 20 is consideration of ordinance number 18-117.
Ordinance number 18-117, an ordinance for the Delaware County Fair Board approving a combined preliminary and final development plan for the Delaware County 4-H building located within the Delaware County Fairgrounds along the north side of Pennsylvania Avenue on property zoned R3, one family residential district.
Ms. Bethlen.
Madam Mayor, members of council, this is for a combined preliminary and final development plan for the replacement of the 4-H building that exists along Pennsylvania Avenue on the fairgrounds. It is zoned residentially now, and you'll note a condition, recommended condition of approval is that by June 1, 2020, and in accordance with their emerging campus-wide plan here for the fair, that the fair submit for a rezoning for all of their property that's contained within the city to something that's more appropriate, probably a planned district written in accordance with their plan. However, this is really a replacement of a building, and we want to keep the momentum going on this particular project as well. And so we're comfortable with advancing the case as it's before you tonight. Aerial photograph, should we need it. One thing to point out here is that we do have a number of parcels. What you can't see here is that we also have some paper alleys. And so there's another condition, recommended condition of approval, that by the certificate of occupancy that the applicant has applied for lot consolidations as well as alley vacations in this area, and they're aware of that as well. And I'm going to stop on the aerial photograph for a second and show you that there is a missing piece of sidewalk here to the west of this particular subject site. There's a condition of approval and lots of discussion at Planning Commission relative to that particular missing piece of sidewalk. Again, there's a master plan. It's really the second version of the master plan for the fairgrounds that they're just wrapping up now. And so there's a condition, recommended condition of approval that suggests within that rezoning and that comprehensive rezoning that we also figure out timing, realistic timing, and fair timing as to when those sections of sidewalk would get constructed as well within the construct of that rezoning. There's a bike plan, master plan as well. This was contained in the packet. It comes through the fairgrounds in a couple of locations. There were some pre-existing agreements dating back to at least 2010 and conversations for a long time, really, about connecting our bike path system on the outside of the fairgrounds site and potentially right through the middle of it as well. But now I guess we're referring to the northern piece as the Bro Path connection, whose acronym I can never remember exactly what it stands for. But in any case, it would get a bike path from Pennsylvania Avenue all the way up to about the Speedway on the north side of the city for maybe a more accurate description. And after a lot of discussion, what's recommended in front of you is that that bike path discussion be solidified and the easements be granted to the city prior to the granting of the final certificate of occupancy for this building, which gives us really a date certain as to when that will occur at this point, but still allows that master plan, which includes this, where is the bike path going to go through the fairgrounds. It includes that discussion as well. It will allow that to conclude as well. So in your packet are the site plans. Here rendered in blue is the building. It's approximately 24,000 square feet, replacing the 9,600 square foot building today. There would be a paved entranceway and driveways around the building. There would be a paved lot to the west and a gravel lot to the north. Added to this development as well. Most of the parking on the fairground site, as you know, occurs really on grass at this point during the fair. And so I think on to some of the proposed elevations, because in working with the fair board, and we've worked with the entire fair board and the volunteer professionals that have brought this forward, including Tony who's here this evening. This building is really pretty remarkable, and I think will make a really grand statement along Pennsylvania Avenue and provide the fair board a lot of utility in terms of an area for assembly, a museum, office area, and potentially an area where they could rent out for events and that sort of thing. It's a beautiful building, and I think it will complement our community well and enhance that Pennsylvania kind of gateway corridor, if you will, as well. There are renderings in your packet, which are even prettier than that last elevation. And so I'll click through those. Your Planning Commission did recommend unanimous approval as proposed before you with the conditions of approval at their last meeting, as do we as staff, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Are we gonna make that gravel parking lot, shouldn't that be paved?
In working with the fair board, the paved parking lot would be on the west side of the building and provide the ADA parking requirement for the building in addition to the access drive aisles around it. We were comfortable as staff with a gravel parking lot on the north side, given the use of this property, not unlike Camp Lazarus and some of its unusual uses there. I think in the long-term master plan of the fair board, that is an issue that we certainly can talk about which areas might be appropriate for permanent paving and which may be more appropriate for more temporary type paving. My prediction would be that in the not too distant future that they probably want to hard pave that northern parking lot anyway. But
I just can't think of anybody that's building that we allow them to have parking lots.
we've allowed it in the industrial park. We've allowed it at Camp Lazarus,
Well,
and we've allowed it here.
Those are under the new standards. That's all I'm thinking.
Correct, that we allow it in very limited circumstances, and I think under the auspices of a pretty unique use. So we're comfortable with the recommendation here.
You know, it's a really a beautiful building, and I think hopefully it's the first of many that we'll see out there because the fair is such an important part of our heritage here, and the buildings now are aging, as we all know. And I know I had some conversations with Chip Thompson, who's on the board, and regarding the easement for the bike path and the multiple ownerships, because I think the county still, I don't think that's been settled yet, where we've resolved that, so we recognize that we're going to have to perhaps be working with them as well. But it'll be a great addition. It really looks nice.
It'll hold almost 500 people.
It's
People
huge.
can rent out.
Is
There's
the-
a partial kitchen in there that they extended.
Will the plan be to rent it out for events?
Yes.
So you could, yeah. It's great.
Would the applicant, any questions for staff at this point? Does the applicant want to add anything to the presentation?
I don't have anything.
Okay.
I'd just be curious the status of the rest of the master plan and when you would think that might be, because I know you had one done a few years ago. It's gone through some updates.
That was before, Tony.
Was that?
I didn't feel
Was the
comfortable
transi-
answering from back there, so I'm sorry.
You have to give your name and address.
I'm Tony Ironman, 1907 River Road, Delaware. I'm a land planner, landscape architect, and I've had the good fortune of working with the Fair Board on this, as well as they've asked me to prepare a proposal to assist them taking the master plan through City Council, City Planning Commission, City Council. Their focus as a Fair Board has been to take care of this building here first, so we haven't had a defined date yet. But in our Planning Commission motion, the zoning of the master plan needs to take place before the final occupancy permit for this facility. I think they're very comfortable that it'll be before June of 2020, I think. Mr. Eflin, is that?
That's when it has to be submitted by.
Yeah. So I know there is a draft of a plan they've shared with me, and they've asked me to come in and help refine it based on some of their comments, as well as some of the cities and the community's comments as well.
Any questions for the applicant?
Just on the levy, on the bed tax, goes back. When does that expire?
2021.
2021. Okay.
We will go probably back to the ballot though, probably in 19. Started mid-year 16.
Any questions for the applicant then? Okay, thank you very much. So this will come back for another reading, 1817. I mean, on December 20th.
At your pleasure, or you can decide you wish to pass it this evening and clear your agenda.
It's the first reading.
Mm-hmm.
What's the wish of council?
Is there a time pressure?
Not for me. I think they want it done by the fair list.
I don't think another week's gonna
No.
screw anything up, so.
Would you like to act on it next, put it up on your docket for the 20th?
Yeah.
Is it, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean,
Week.
it's, our policies say typical 2 readings, so it's not outside.
Okay, let's move on to item 21 and 22. Elaine, if you'll please read those on record.
Ordinance number 18-118, an ordinance for Fahey Bank Company approving a combined preliminary and final development plan for Fahey Bank on approximately 0.81 acres on property zone B3 Community Business District and located at 75 West William Street. An ordinance number 18-119, an ordinance for Fahey Bank Company approving a conditional use permit for Fahey Bank on approximately 0.81 acres, property zone B3 Community Business District, and located at 75 West William Street.
Mr. Eflin?
Madam Mayor, members of council, this matter in terms of the conditional use, and we normally keep them together, scheduled for public hearing on January 14th to avoid, we're obviously at the end of the year here, but for your next truly regular business meeting that doesn't involve budget. And we would be prepared to present it at that time as per usual, and that would be the official public hearing.
Okay. Move on to item 21 and 20. Yeah, I'm sorry, just 21. No, 21 and 20, 23 and 24. I'm all right. Gosh, right now.
Ordinance number 18-120, an ordinance for Nutter Company LLC approving a conditional use permit for Blue Sky Car Wash on approximately 1.28 acres on property zoned A1 PMU Agricultural District with a planned mixed-use overlay district and located on Lot 2 of the Coughlin Crossing development. And ordinance number 18-121, an ordinance for Nutter Company LLC approving a combined preliminary and final development plan for Blue Sky Car Wash on approximately 1.28 acres on property zoned A1 PMU Agricultural District with a planned mixed-use overlay district and located on Lot 2 of the Coughlin Crossing development.
Ditto.
Madam Mayor, members of council, yeah, ditto to the last two cases. The only thing I would note for you is that this did come before the Planning Commission as a concept plan several months ago, and it's generally well received. And the information and the concept that you have, the preliminary plan that you have in front of you is in keeping with that concept plan. So we will present that in January, and there's a conditional use with that, which will require a public hearing at that time as well.
Okay. Moving right along, item 25.
Ordinance number 18-122, an ordinance establishing the salary and benefits of the council clerk and declaring an emergency. Emergency clause, this ordinance is declared to be an emergency measure necessary for the immediate preservation of the public peace, property, health, safety, and welfare of the city. The emergency clause is required to enact the changes effective on December 26, 2018, which coincides with the new calendar year and the effective date of the management pay plan for 2019. Therefore, this ordinance shall be in full force and effect immediately upon its passage.
Thank you. Mrs. Walker?
While she's talking, Madam Mayor, real quick, just a note about the emergency clause. If council chooses not to pass the emergency clause, that's up to you, but basically it wouldn't take effect for 30 days. We still could make it go retroactive to the date. It would just give time if you wanted to allow for a referendum or something. That's what the emergency clause, the only effect that has.
I guess I'm confused on why this is on our agenda right now. Because the last meeting we had, we were supposed to be presented an ordinance, and we're supposed to be presented a range of being in the step plan. And we haven't had the conversation amongst ourselves about that, which route we wanted to go.
That ordinance went out.
No, follow me.
Okay.
He was supposed to present an ordinance. If we decided to do this as an ordinance, and we were also be presented if we decided to put it into the step plan.
Right.
And then we were going to have a conversation of which one we wanted. We haven't had that conversation. It looks like this was just decided we're going to do an ordinance. Unless I missed a meeting or I missed something since
No, I thought that's the way it was
Unless
supposed to happen
executive
too. We were supposed to see it listed both ways and then make a choice.
Well, there was a discussion that I understand the mayor and the vice mayor had about the importance of needing to get this on the agenda, and we were directed to go ahead, and I sent out an email and asked all of council, if I don't hear anything from anybody, are we okay to move forward having this on the agenda? And I only heard back from a couple people in the affirmative to go ahead and put that on.
I didn't send that, so I didn't see that.
Okay.
And it seemed like Darren sent out an ordinance to look it over to see what everybody thought.
I understand
Yeah.
that.
He did,
We
like, the next
had a
day.
conversation in
Right.
ES and said that we, as the council, we're going to make a decision which route we wanted to go with this to make the decision. This says that the decision's already been made, it's going to go into an ordinance as opposed to, and that's part of that standard pay plan.
We can remove it and we can do.
No, I'm just saying, unless I've missed something, apparently I've missed an email or something. And so you have two?
I didn't see it.
I was looking for the email because I remember it right after.
I can absolutely send it out because it also had the pay plan. I included the ranges in M4, M5, and M6 as requested and what those pay ranges were. So I included that along with the ordinance and asked, like I said, asked all of council to please get back to me if you were not interested because we were bouncing up against a time issue.
Yeah, following the agenda setting meeting that I had with the mayor and vice mayor, we reviewed that. We reviewed the proposed ordinance.
I know Kyle replied, Jim replied.
It went out on December 5th at 2:23.
I see it.
Procedural wise, the good news is, and I hate to jump in here, but just because it's on the agenda, we're not expecting to pass it.
It's not about it being on the agenda. It's about, we were supposed to have a conversation amongst.
No, I guess what I'm saying is we can still have that conversation because the other move, which would be the pay plan isn't going to be voted on yet either. So we can make adjustments up until next meeting if you want to have that conversation. So we can make it work either way. I didn't want you to feel like you lost that opportunity was all I was saying.
That's fine.
We'll probably be done early enough if you want to go back to an executive session tonight, or we
I
can
do
do it
not
on the
do that
20th.
tonight. I do not.
We'll do it on the 20th.
Myself.
Okay. Okay.
Does somebody want to explain the ordinance? Or do you want to, I mean,
I can do that too.
Or it's up to council.
You want to do what? You want to explain the ordinance?
I don't.
Is that what you said? We can do it in
This seems like a
executive.
whole executive session thing. I don't,
Okay.
whatever you guys want to do. I just
We can wait and do it in executive. That's fine.
get lost in the weeds.
Okay. Moving on, city
Okay,
manager.
I'll be out of town on this weekend. Jackie will be acting as city manager at that time. Unfortunately, I'll have to miss the holiday party, which will be the first one I've missed. It's unfortunate. ED 411 was very worthwhile. We heard from Governor-elect DeWine. We heard from Les Wexner. Very well-organized conference that I think was very beneficial. There is a DKMM special meeting on, I think it's the 17th, that I'll be attending on behalf of the city regarding this issue with the proposed tipping fees for recycling and what responsibility the district has to assist the communities that are dealing with that right now. So that'll be, it's a week from today. And I did an impromptu tour of the new fire EMS station today after the Rotary, and they're working hard. There was probably 25 trucks there of all the different subcontractors trying to meet Fire Chief Donahue's deadline of, I think, for beginning of January, I think. So it looks good.
Yeah, we should have furniture delivered starting December 21st. So they're moving along. Not only that, but it'll probably be the first quarter, as we say, before we'll be operational down there, getting everything set up. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Council comments? Mr. Jones?
No, thank you. No.
Mr. Keller?
None.
Mr. Browning?
No, thank you.
Mr. Rourke?
No, thank you.
Nothing.
I'll go on with nothing, thank you.
All right. Motion to adjourn. We are adjourned at 8:30.
No, it's just informed. What's going on the agenda. I don't know if there's any questions.